Daredevil Born Again has just completed its first season on Disney+, so now's the perfect time to stop and rank all of the Marvel Disney Plus live-action shows. Hi, my name's Zach, and today we're going to take all the Marvel Disney Plus shows and specials and throw them on a tier ranking list. Just for clarification, these are going to be live action shows as well as shows that take place directly in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So we won't be talking about the animated excellent X-Men 97 or the animated show Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. We're just going to focus on the shows directly impacted in the MCU and star live action characters. And with that said, let's kick this off in chronological order with WandaVision. And when WandaVision premiered in 2020, it was a series of risks for Marvel. Not only was it the first show that they released on Disney Plus through the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it was also starring two characters that were supporting characters in the movies that, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't all that invested in. Wanda Maximoff and Vision, they never really captivated me as some of my favorite characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe through the movies. Also, you're throwing them into a show that is centered around replicating sitcoms from the 50s and the 60s. And the show does spend a surprising amount of time doing just straight up sitcom episodes from that era. Now, I grew up kind of watching those types of shows with my grandparents. I really enjoyed watching those shows. So the humor and the replication of those sitcom episodes at the start of WandaVision, I actually really liked. I was really into. I know a lot of people who dropped off before episode 3 because of how committed they were to throwing back to that sitcom style. But for me, it always worked. But the thing that made WandaVision take off, especially when it was premiering week by week during the pandemic era, was the mystery aspect they were able to incorporate into the show, which kept you guessing and had speculation and fan theories going on for months as we waited a week for the next episode to drop. But even beyond that, Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany give their best performances in the entirety of the MCU. This totally took Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda Maximoff. Not only did her stardom shoot off into the stratosphere, but the character of Wanda also became a beloved fan favorite moving forward in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as well as Paul Bettany as Vision, and the relationship of the two, because in Infinity War and Endgame, there wasn't enough time dedicated to the couple to really get me to love and root for them as a romantic pair. But WandaVision, dealing with the ramifications of grief and mourning and loss, really did a lot to get me to love these two as a couple. And for me, it is one of the few Marvel Disney Plus series that I thought did a really good job sticking the landing. This does lose a little bit of the fun with that mystery aspect kind of removed, but even knowing where the mystery goes, catching all of those Easter eggs and tie-ins to it on retrospect is still pretty enjoyable. So WandaVision for me is a pretty high one up there. I'm going to put WandaVision in the number 2 spot. It used to be my favorite of the Disney Plus shows, but that has since changed, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Following WandaVision, we've got Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now, when they announced the first batch of Marvel Disney Plus shows that were coming out with WandaVision, Falcon, Winter Soldier, and Loki, Falcon and Winter Soldier was definitely the one I was most anticipating, because you're taking Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan, who had a really fun camaraderie and had a fun frenemy kind of energy in Civil War and throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe since then, that throwing these two into a buddy cop scenario type series was really intriguing for me. Plus, you've got Anthony Mackie coming off of Endgame. Sam Wilson is taking up the mantle of Captain America. This series heavily focused on the transition of him from Falcon to Captain America, and there's a lot of moments in Falcon and Winter Soldier that I think are some of the best in the Marvel Cinematic Universe Disney Plus shows, where Sebastian Stan and Anthony Mackie have that camaraderie, that chemistry that you were hoping they would have throughout the entire series. They introduced new characters such as Wyatt Russell's U.S. agent who we're later going to see appear again in Thunderbolts. I love the story that they give him, kind of the tragic downfall of his character throughout the series. This is a show that does get a little bit of a disadvantage because their plot was going to be pretty sensitive subject matter, especially once the pandemic happened, so they went back and had to reshoot and cut a lot of stuff, and when you watch the show, you can kind of feel that a little bit in the narrative. But what the show does get right is that relationship between Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan's Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes, the fun that those two bring to the show. The action's pretty great here. I love the return of Zemo. The narrative struggles a little bit, but even with that, I find this show to be pretty fun and one of the more underrated Marvel Disney Plus series. I'm going to place this in the number 6 spot, just missing out on joining that top 5. Next up, Loki, and I'm just going to group Loki Season 1 and Season 2 together, as they do pretty much go together as one cohesive narrative story. And when it comes to Loki, this was the one that I was most apprehensive about in the first batch of shows that they announced, because Loki has died many times. He was supposed to officially be dead after Infinity War, of course. In Endgame, he grabs that Tesseract in another timeline and vanishes, and this picks up with where that Loki left off. And I think the brilliant thing that Loki does is not only is it a really fun and interesting time travel story within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, introducing us to a whole new corner of the universe with the TVA and how all that works, but it also reinvented the character of Loki, where he is the character that we know and love, but he's a completely different version of that character. And Tom Hiddleston really pulls that off in this series, where it feels both familiar but also like a completely fresh and new character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where they did something that I thought was nearly impossible, where I no longer think of Loki and Thor. When I think of Loki, I think of Loki and Morbius. They really create a fun and dynamic synergy between the two characters, where I don't care what adventure they're going on, I just want to be around, I want to be a part of it, because of the way that these two bounce off of each other so well. Of course, with that, you've got a bunch of other fun characters thrown into the mix, with Ke-Huy Quan coming in here in Season 2, almost stealing the show. Jonathan Majors giving a fun and threatening performance as both He Remains and his other variants that pop out throughout the show. And Season 1 could kind of feel a little bit all over the place, but Season 2 is so consistent and focused on its narrative and the story that it's one of the more satisfying endings to a Marvel Disney Plus series, because they clearly knew where they were going. The director and the showrunner has said that they did not have to do reshoots, they did not have to rewrite a thing. This is the direction they were going. They were able to shoot and do everything that they planned to do from the start, and it really shows by the time you get to that Season 2 finale, where they leave off with the Loki character, where the completion of his character arc has gone. It's so satisfying and fulfilling. Loki's a good one for me. Loki's in my top 3. Loki's gonna go in number 3. And then we move on to What If, which I know at the beginning of this I said we were just gonna focus on the live action characters and those that work in the MCU movies proper universe. What If is a little bit of a gray area, where it doesn't really tie into the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but you do have the actors who played the characters in What If voicing a lot of the characters in the show. A lot of the show's scenarios are events around the movies, just trying to flip them on their head, do something different with them, as the whole premise of the show What If is to go in a different direction from what we saw in the movies. When it comes to this series, there were a couple episodes that had my interest, especially in Season 1. The zombie episode was kind of fun. I thought the episode where Hank Pym kills all the Avengers was interesting. The Doctor Strange episode in particular is probably the best one that I ever watched of this show, but this show really did fail to keep me coming back week to week. I fell off after Season 1. I didn't watch season 2. I didn't watch season 3. I just didn't find this show something worth my time, as the scenarios and the events that they would try to flip on their heads and change and do something different with always felt kind of lackluster. I just didn't find it all that interesting, and because it didn't keep my attention and I fell off of the show after one season, it's got to go down in the bottom of the worst. It's number 14 on this list. It's my least favorite one, unfortunately. Next up is Hawkeye, and Hawkeye is one of those series that has grown on me a bit more than when I first watched it. Where when I first watched Hawkeye, I did enjoy it, especially during the holiday season, being Christmas themed and having the holiday Die Hard kind of event going on week to week on Disney Plus. I enjoyed tuning in to Hawkeye. I like that it's street level. I like that we get more focus on Jeremy Renner's character. I love the inclusion of Haley Steinfeld in here as his counterpart, as his sidekick. The story of Hawkeye, though, it does get a little bit overly convoluted when you bring in the Yelena whole angle coming off of the post-credit scene from Black Widow, the introduction of Kingpin into this universe by the end of the series, I don't think is done the smoothest way, especially if you've never really watched the Daredevil show, which at the time I hadn't. He kind of comes in out of left field. They don't really do much to set him up as a character within the Hawkeye show. They really rely on the knowledge of Daredevil, and even with that knowledge, it doesn't always feel like it lines up with the character of Kingpin from the Daredevil show. But the action was always a ton of fun. Jeremy Renner was so charismatic, with Haley Steinfeld bringing that youthful energy to the show. The Christmas aspect of it as well, I think, really does work, especially in retrospect. There's a lot of fun moments that you remember from the show, such as Rogers the Musical, which I always get a kick out of when I go back and revisit this show. Whenever I think back to Hawkeye, I always remember it a little bit less than how I feel when I go back and watch Hawkeye, where it does put a smile on my face. I grin throughout the entire thing. Yeah, there's a couple episodes here and there that kind of slow the pace down a bit, but this is one that I do think has gotten better for me as it has aged. So it's not going to be super high for me, but I do think I'm going to put it in the top 10. I'll put it at number 8, which is going to bring us to our first major disappointment on this list with Moon Knight, where I didn't know anything about the Moon Knight character, so there wasn't really that much at stake for me whether I was going to like or dislike this show. I heard a lot of great things about the character, but this was definitely my introduction to the character. I thought the trailers looked really cool, and the first episode of Moon Knight, I think, is one of the best episodes that they have ever done with Marvel on Disney Plus, where Oscar Isaac is just so compelling as this character. The way that they set up this mystery of what's going on with him, why does he keep waking up in places that he doesn't remember going to, the whole split personality that they bring into the show was really intriguing for me. And Oscar Isaac especially is one of the best actors in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is one of the best performances to ever come out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Likewise, Ethan Hawke in here as the villain, I thought was a very terrifying presence on screen. The way that he was kind of this convincing cult leader was a really interesting angle for them to go, especially in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But when it comes to the way that the narrative plays out with Moon Knight, I do feel like the show kind of lost its plot a couple of times, got overly discombobulated and convoluted for its own good, where they try to do these really in-depth looks at the psychological aspect of Oscar Isaac's character. Meanwhile, they also want to do this globe-trotting adventure that goes to all these places, and it never really feels like the whole show gets pulled together in a cohesive, natural way, to the point that by the end of the show, when we have these huge Egyptian god beings fighting over the city of Cairo, it feels out of place in this show. It feels poorly set up. Everything feels so rushed by the time that you get there, where Moon Knight starts off as this really enticing and intriguing mystery, suspenseful show, and then it just slowly starts to unravel and unravel. as you go along, to the point where it just kind of falls apart by the end, which is so unfortunate because the performances in here are so great. But unfortunately for me, Moon Knight is one of the worst series that they've done up until this point. I don't think it's the worst one. I'll put it in the worst category, definitely above What If, but it could have been just so much better. And then we get to Miss Marvel, which I'm not even going to bury the lead here. This is one of my favorite Disney Plus Marvel shows they've done thus far. This is going up there in the top 5, right there in the number 5 slot. What they've done with this show is they've introduced one of the most charismatic and most fun characters that the MCU has had in a very long time, with Kamala Khan, played here by Iman Vellani, who brings such a refreshing and needed youthful energy into the MCU that we haven't had in a very long time. I love the family dynamic with her and her brother and her parents. The show just had a way of making this feel so inviting, like we were actually being involved in the Khan family. I do think that when this show is being the street level neighborhood superhero story, it is stronger than when it goes off to be this global big action adventure. But I do appreciate the history lessons that we get in the show. There was a lot that I didn't know about the Muslim culture that this show introduced me to. So the fact that this show was able to entertain and be this fun superhero show while also bringing some education into the room is never a bad thing. I thought they did it very well, the way that they blended it together. The conclusion of this season I did feel was a little bit small-scaled and a little bit lackluster than I would have liked it to be. But even with that said, the characters were so charming and engaging. I really got into the world, into the story. I really got invested into what was happening throughout the entire season, that I loved seeing Kamala Khan pop up on the big screen in the Marvels, and I can't wait to see more of this character as we move forward in the MCU. And then we come to perhaps the most controversial project in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe with She-Hulk, where this was the show that for me, for all the way from 2008 to 2021, or whenever this came out, 2022, I did not have a single Marvel Universe movie that I did not like until we got to She-Hulk. This is the first Marvel Cinematic Universe project that I actively disliked, because I found that for me, She-Hulk was a show that took the verisimilitude out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. She-Hulk lived or died based on its comedic presence, because at the core of this show, it was a comedy. It was made to make you laugh. It was made to make you laugh with meta humor and breaking the fourth wall of the MCU. And for me, I didn't find a lot of this show funny. I didn't find that the humor worked. And because the humor wasn't funny to me and the humor didn't work, all this show managed to do was break my verisimilitude, my belief in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where this is a show where a lot of people who are fans of the She-Hulk comics, they like this show a lot more than most because of how accurately it translates the comics to the screen. But the Marvel Cinematic Universe is not the comics. It's a universe that we are meant to buy into and believe on the screen. And when you have a character like She-Hulk at the end going to the robot of Kevin, who's clearly based off Kevin Feige, and they talk about how the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe is an algorithm of movies made up by this robot, and you got She-Hulk there going to Marvel Studios, breaking through the Disney Plus screen, it just takes me out of the universe. And because I don't find the show funny, I don't find the humor in it to work, all it does is break that veil of reality for me. Now, there was some moments in She-Hulk that I did enjoy. I thought the Matt Murdock character coming in here, the relationship between Matt Murdock and Tatiana Maslany's She-Hulk was very cute and charming, and I liked the stuff they did with Daredevil in it. I thought the first episode where we got Mark Ruffalo's Bruce Banner Hulk in the show, working alongside Tatiana Maslany's She-Hulk, I liked the dynamic that was going on there. There were a couple jokes within the first couple episodes that did get a chuckle out of me, but for the most part, I found She-Hulk to be a painfully dreadful experience to go through that only managed to hurt the MCU more for me than it did anything to benefit it or make it better. This is my least favorite of the live action Marvel Disney Plus shows by far. I would put it on over What If, so I guess it goes in the number 13 slot. But as that is, it's just not a show that I particularly enjoy. And that brings us to our first special on this list with Werewolf by Night, which is kind of Marvel's true first venture into the horror genre. And when it comes to this just hour-long special on Disney Plus, which is detached from the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe characters, it's pretty detached from the storyline going on in the MCU as a whole. It allows it to just be a fun little creature feature thriller for the Halloween season. It came out around Halloween time. I found that the story of these elite monster killers having to go after one another to be quite fun to watch. It was simple enough that you kind of got everyone's character motivations and background. You didn't need to do much to draw out the story, and it was just able to be this self-contained little adventure in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that took us to a different corner, a different pocket of the universe, different tone than we're used to in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with some fun new characters that you spend an hour with. And I actually enjoyed it so much, I'm going to throw it up there pretty high. I'm going to put it in the number 7 slot, just above Hawkeye. Sticking with the specials, that brings us to the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. I'm not even going to bury the lead here. This is going up into number 4 for me. This is a top 5 for me, where James Gunn and the entire Guardians crew and cast shot this during the production of Guardians Volume 3. So that synergy and energy that they had going when they were making Guardians 3 makes its way into the Guardians Holiday Special. We get to see a little bit more of Drax and Mantis's dynamic as they go to capture Kevin Bacon for a depressed Star-Lord, which gives us some really fun, goofy shenanigans on Earth with the two characters. It's got some great music in it as well that James Gunn is able to once again incorporate into this Guardians project. It's just a little self-contained holiday special that they made for the Christmas season with the Guardians of the Galaxy, that because the third film is the last time that we got to see these group of characters together, as they have said that they are done with this rendition of the Guardians crew, it's nice to have this little piece of fun holiday charm to look back on for all these years ahead of us. It's got the James Gunn sensibilities of humor and charm and music. Drax, Mantis, they're great. I have a ton of fun with this. It's definitely become a Christmas tradition to put this on every year, putting it up there high at number 4. It's making the top 5. But perhaps the biggest disappointment to come up on this list is Secret Invasion, where they got such a great cast for this, with Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury finally getting a full front-centered story of him. They got Don Cheadle coming back in here. They've added Emilia Clarke into the cast, Ben Mendelsohn. There's so many great aspects to Secret Invasion, and I will admit that for the first little bit of this show, I was kind of into the spy espionage tone that was going on. There was a little bit of an intriguing mystery going on with the Skrulls and how they worked and all that kind of stuff. But as the show went on and the story unfolded more and more, it just got more drawn out and less interesting, a little bit more predictable. I'm not a fan of the twist of Don Cheadle's Rhodey being a Skrull the whole time. I feel like it's very poorly explained and was so telegraphed early on in the show that by the time the show reveals it, it's a no-duh situation. It's not a big reveal. Likewise, when it comes to Emilia Clarke's character, where she winds up at the end, where they take all the blood of every hero from the Endgame battle and inject it into her characters, where she just has all the powers of everyone that ever lived or existed in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is so dumb. A lot of this show is just something that Marvel needs to leave behind and forget about. Retcon, do whatever you got to do with it. Secret Invasion had such high potential. The trailers were great. The show itself really turned out to be a dud. Now, the question is, do I put this worse than She-Hulk or better than She-Hulk? And I think I'm going to put it worse than She-Hulk because She-Hulk does have the fun, moments with Bruce and Jen, as well as Matt Murdock in there. I like those little moments in She-Hulk. There's very little that I like past episode 2 of Secret Invasion, especially in retrospect, thinking back on the show. It just gets worse and worse for me. Then we get to our first of the spin-offs from one of these shows with Echo, who, of course, Echo was a character introduced in Hawkeye as one of the villains, and then they gave her her own standalone show, which I think I liked more than most, where the character of Maya I did find to be more interesting in this show as she's trying to kind of come into her own from underneath Kingpin's thumb. I liked the relationship that they set up and developed between Kingpin and Maya in the show itself. I liked the smaller street level, local community type feeling where, much like Miss Marvel, we got to just dive into a culture with Maya and her family and the dynamics that worked there. I thought that some of the action sequences in this were fun. It was allowed to be a little bit more hard edge and R-rated than a lot of the other Disney Plus shows because of Kingpin in here. We did get a little sprinkle of Daredevil connections, which was kind of fun and a lot and cool. But at the end of the day, when it comes to Echo, it's just a show that wasn't able to stick the landing, where I thought it had some intriguing and interesting ideas throughout the episodes, but by the time we got to the end and it tries to all pull together and come together, it just feels like the show itself just went off the rails, became a different show. It doesn't feel like the conclusion of this show was where the series was going when it began. It just feels very clumsy. It feels written on the spot. I don't really like what they ended up doing by the end of the season with Kingpin, with Maya. Of course, it sets up Kingpin to go forward in Daredevil Born Again as mayor, so that's good. But other than that, Echo was fine. I don't think it's one of the worst shows, but for sake of this tier ranking, it's got to go in the worst category. But it's going to go in the number 11 spot, in front of She-Hulk and right behind Moon Knight. Like I said, I think I liked it more than most. I didn't think it sucked. Definitely wasn't the best, though. Which brings us to the second spinoff of these shows with Agatha. Of course, Agatha All Along, coming off of WandaVision, Kathryn Hahn getting her own show. And when it comes to Agatha, I definitely wasn't interested in checking this out very much when they announced it. I thought the Agatha character worked fine as a supporting character, as a villain in WandaVision, but I wasn't really all that interested in seeing a solo outing from her. And the show itself was a fun little fantasy adventure show for the Halloween season, kind of similar to Werewolf by Night, where they were able to go a little bit more with the darker horror, with the more darker tone that felt more detached from the MCU proper, with characters that didn't really feel like they had any consequential actions that affect the MCU as a whole. The cast here of Agatha and Billy and all these woman witches going on this long trek down the road where they face challenges. Some of it was shot really cool. I thought some of the challenges that they come across were intriguing and interesting. The way that they tie back to the WandaVision series with the character of Billy and keeping that mystery aspect going throughout the show, while not as enticing or as intriguing as the WandaVision mystery that was going on, it was definitely a little bit easier to figure out. It was fun. It was a fun little inclusion and tie back to the WandaVision show to have in here. Is Agatha All Along a Marvel Disney Plus show that I feel myself wanting to go back to, wanting to rewatch after having finished it? Not really. I don't think I'm going to revisit this one all that much, but it definitely is able to break out of the worst category and make it into the top 10. It's in the number 9 slot. I thought it was a totally harmless, fine, enjoyable enough show. If they get a second season, I'll check it out, but I'm not clamoring for more. Let's put it that way. Which, of course, brings us to our latest show, Daredevil Born Again, and as you probably have already guessed, the number 1 slot in this tier list ranking. Now, Daredevil Born Again does have the advantage and the benefit of having a solid, firm foundation from the Netflix series that they were able to build off of and expand upon with Daredevil Born Again. They were able to take Daredevil, Matt Murdock, and Kingpin Wilson Fisk and put them on these parallel journeys of men who are trying to shed their old lives, but the route that they go to try and get away from who they are inadvertently leads them back to being who they were. I thought the way that this show incorporated the past characters of the Netflix show to launch themselves into a new direction with Disney Plus worked really well, and definitely set up Matt Murdock to have a very conflicted character journey throughout the entire show, as well as Wilson Fisk to also have a conflicting character journey throughout the show. The way that these two are both at the same time trying to be better men than they were before, but finding themselves back in their old ways, I thought was really interesting. The way that the show demonstrated that throughout the entire 8-episode arc. The way the show ties back to the Netflix show with little Easter eggs and moments that pay homage to the Netflix origins of this show, while also being able to stand on its own feet as its own thing, I think is very impressive of the show to do. There is issues with some of the plotting of the show where they introduce a character of Muse, but it doesn't really feel like that storyline had enough time to breathe to go anywhere. There's also a couple moments in the short 8-episode season where it does feel like they had to rush and leave some aspects of the story and the character journeys a little bit underdeveloped, but where it matters, where this show needed to be able to live up to the legacy of the Netflix show with the writing, with the character dynamics, with the dialogue, with the inner conflicts of both our hero and our antagonist, they were able to keep all of that intact. They were able to take that and build upon it and expand upon it in a new, fresh way for Disney Plus. Surprisingly, it's some of the most violent the show ever got, even from the Netflix series. It's got the most adult, mature subject of all of the Disney Plus Marvel shows. Because of how great the Daredevil Netflix show is, this had almost a near impossible task of living up to those 3 previous seasons, and it actually did a pretty phenomenal job 7 years later, coming back to give us something that's both familiar but also new and creative. So for me, Daredevil Born Again is easily the best Marvel Disney Plus show that they have done up until this point, and it goes up in that #1 slot. If you like videos like this, I've got a bunch more Marvel rankings right up there in that playlist that you can check out, or check out that video. It's the latest video uploaded to the channel. Tell me down below in the comments how you would rank these Disney Plus Marvel shows. Don't just watch movies and TV, talk movies and TV. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.